Hi, everybody. This is Allison from Alley Cat Creations. How are you? If you get anything from my work, an epiphany, a connected dot, a new author, or a new book to explore, please considering helping me out. The links will be dropped in the box below. I'm still here. Somber day. This is 1 year marked that I lost my job. 1 year. And I'm still here. Still alive. Barely. But I'm here. Anywho, I'm going to read The Secret Doctrine by Blavatsky. I'm going to pick up on stanza 6. Continued, of course. It's going to get juicy, I promise. Her work is phenomenal. But I only read 2 in because they were a little on the shorter side. This is rather lengthy, this one. So we'll go with it. Of the 7 elements, first 1 manifested, 6 concealed, 2 manifested, 5 concealed, 3 manifested, 4 concealed, 4 produced, 3 hidden, 4 and 1 Tizan fraction revealed, 2 and 1 half concealed, 6 to be manifested, 1 laid aside. Lastly, 7 small wheels revolving, 1 given birth to the other. Although these stanzas refer to the whole universe after Mahapralaya, universal destruction, yet the sentence, as any student of occultism may see, refers also by analogy to the evolution and final formation of the primitive through compound 7 elements of our earth. Of these 4 elements are now fully manifested, while the 5th, ether, is only partially so, as we are hardly in the second half of the 4th round, and consequently the 5th element will manifest fully only in the 5th round. Interesting. The worlds, including our own, were of course as germs, primarily evolved from the 1 element in its 2nd stage, father-mother, the differentiated world's soul, not what is termed the oversoul by Emerson. While we call it, with modern science, cosmic dust and fire mist, or occultism, akasha, javatma, divine astral light, or the soul of the world. But this first stage of evolution was in due course of time, followed by the next. No world, as no heavenly body, could be constructed on the objective plane had not the elements had been sufficiently differentiated already from the primeval ilus, resting in Leia. The latter term is a synonym of nirvana. It is, in fact, a nirvanic dissociation of all substances merged after a life cycle into the latency of their primary conditions. It is the luminous but bodiless shadow of matter that was the realm of negativeness, wherein lie latent during their period of rest the active forces of the universe. Now, speaking of elements, it is made the standing reproach of the ancients that they suppose their elements simple and undecomposable. Once more, this is an unwarrantable statement, as, at any rate, their initiated philosophers can hardly come under such an imputation, since it is they who have invented allegories and religions, myths from the beginning. Had they been ignorant of the heterogeneity of the elements, they would have had no personifications of fire, air, water, earth, and ether. Their cosmic gods and goddesses would never have been blessed with such prosperity, with so many sons and daughters, elements born from and within each respective element. Alchemy and occult phenomena would have been a delusion and a snare, even in theory, had the ancients been ignorant of the potentialities and correlative functions and attributes of every element that enters into compensation of air, water, earth, and even fire, the latter a terra incognita to this day to modern science, which is obliged to call it motion, evolution of light and heat, state of ignition, defining it by its outward aspects, in short, and remaining ignorant of its nature. But that which modern science seems to fail to perceive is that, differentiated as many have been, those simple chemical atoms, which archaic philosophy called the creators of their respective parents, fathers, brothers, husbands, and of their mothers, and those mothers the daughters of their own sons, like Aditi and Daksha, for example, differentiated all these elements, were in the beginning, still they were not the compound bodies known to science as they are now. Neither water, air, earth, synonym for solids generally, existed in their present form, representing the three states of matter alone recognized by science. For all those are the productions already recombined by the atmosphere of globes, completely formed even to fire, so that in the first periods of the Earth's formation, they were something quite sui generis. Now that the conditions and laws ruling our solar system are fully developed, and that the atmosphere of our Earth, as of every other globe, has become, so to say, a crucible of its own, occult science teaches that there is a perceptual change and exchange taking place in the space of molecules, or of atoms rather, correlating and thus changing their combining equivalents on every planet. Some men of science and those among the greatest physicists and chemists begin to suspect the fact, which has been known for ages to the occultists. The spectroscope only shows the probable similarity on external evidence of terrestrial and sidereal substance. It is unable to go any further, or to show whether atoms gravitate towards one another in the same way and under the same conditions as they are supposed to do on our planet, physically and chemically. The scale of temperature from the highest degree to the lowest that can be conceived of may be imagined to be one and the same in for the whole universe. Nevertheless, its properties, other than those of dissociated and reassociation, differ on every planet, and thus atoms enter into new forms of existence undreamt of and incognizable to physical science. As already expressed in 5 years of theology, the essence of cometry, matter, for instance, is totally different from any of the chemical or physical characteristics with which the greatest chemists and physicists of the earth are acquainted. And even that matter, during rapid passage through our atmosphere, undergoes a certain change in its nature. Thus, not alone the elements of our planets, but even those of all its sisters in the solar system differ widely from each other in their combinations, as from the cosmic elements beyond our solar limits. Therefore, they cannot be taken as a standard for comparison with the same in other worlds, enshrined in their virgin, pristine state within the bosom of the eternal mother. Every atom born beyond the threshold of her realm is doomed to incessant differentiation. The mother sleeps, yet is ever breathing, and every breath sends out into the plane of manifestation her protean products, which, carried on by the wave of influx, are scattered by Fohat and driven toward and beyond this and another planetary atmosphere. Once caught by the latter, the atom is lost. Its pristine purity is gone forever, unless fate disassociates it by leading it to a current of reflux. An occult term meaning quite a different process from which the ordinary term implies, when it may be carried once more to the borderland where it had been perished, taking its flight not into space above, but into space within. It will be brought under a state of differential equilibrium and happily reabsorbed, where a true learned occultist alchemist to write the life and adventures of an atom. He would secure thereby the eternal scorn of the modern chemist, perchance also his subsequent gratitude. However it may be, the breath of the Father Mother issue, cold and radiant, and gels hot and corrupt, to cool once more, and to be purified in the eternal bosom of inner space, says the commentary. Man absorbs cold, pure air on the mountaintop and throws it out impure, hot, transformed. Thus, the higher atmosphere being the mouth, and the lower one the lungs of every globe, the man of our planet breathes only the refuse of the mother. Therefore, he is doomed to die on it. The process referred to as the small wheels giving birth, one to another, takes place in the sixth region from above, and the plane of the most material world of all in manifested cosmos, our terrestrial plane. These 7 wheels are our planetary chain. By wheels, the virtuous spheres and centers of force are generally meant, but in this case, they refer to our septenary ring. I'm writing notes on the last part of this. Principle of gender. Ever so flowing. Very interesting. That kind of correlates, as it all does. It's very interesting. How that is going to come up again in my notes. Very proud. Part 4. Stanza 6 still. He builds them in the likeness of older worlds, placing them on the imperishable centers. How does Fohat build them? He collects the fiery dust. He makes balls of fire, runs through them and round them, infusing life thereinto, then sets them into motion, some the other way. They are cold, he makes them hot. They are dry, he makes them moist. They shine, he fans and cools them. Thus acts Fohat from one twilight to the other during 7 eternities. The worlds are built in the likeness of older wheels, those that existed in preceding Manvaratas and went into Pralaya, because the law for the birth, growth, and decay of everything in cosmos, from the sun to the glowworm in the grass, is one. It is an everlasting work of perfection with every new appearance, but the substance, matter, and forces are all one and the same. Oops, I've been saying that for a long time. But this law acts on every planet through minor and varying laws. The imperishable Laya centers have a great importance, and their meaning must be fully understood if we would have a clear conception of the archaic cosmogony, whose theories have now passed into occultism. At present, one thing may be stated: the worlds are built neither upon nor over nor in the Laya centers. the 0 point being a condition, not any mathematical point. Bear in mind that Fohat, the constructive force of cosmic electricity, is said metaphorically to have sprung like Ruda from Brahma, from the brain of the father and the bosom of the mother, and then to have metamorphosized himself into a male and a female polarity into positive and negative electricity. Kabbalion again, damn it. He has 7 sons who are his brothers, and Fohat is forced to be born time after time wherever any 2 of his son brothers indulge in too close contact, whether an embrace or a fight. To avoid this, he binds together and unites those of unlike nature and separates those of similar temperaments. Positive. This, of course, relates, as anyone can see, to electricity generated by friction and to the law involving attraction between 2 objects of unlike and repulsion between those of like polarity. The 7 sons, brothers, however, represent and personify the 7 forms of cosmic magnetism called the practical occultism, the 7 radicals, whose cooperative and active progeny are, among other energies, electricity, magnetism, sound, light, heat, cohesion. Occult science defines all these as supersensuous effects in their hidden behavior and as objective phenomena in the world of senses. The former requiring abnormal faculties to perceive them, the latter, our ordinary physical senses. They all pertain to and are emanations of still more supersensuous spiritual qualities, not personated by, but belonging to real and conscious causes. To attempt a description of such entities would be worse than useless. The reader must bear in mind that according to our teaching, which regards this phenomenal universe as great illusion, the nearer a body to its unknown substance, the more it approaches reality. As being removed the further from this world of Maya. Therefore, through the molecular constitution of the bodies is not deducible from their manifestations on this plane of consciousness, they nevertheless, from the standpoint of the adept occultist, possess a distinctive objective, if not material structure, in the relatively noumenal as opposed to the phenomenal universe. Men of science may term them force or forces generated by matter or modes of its motion, if they will. Occultism sees in the effects elemental forces, and in the direct causes producing them intelligent divine workmen. The intimate connection of those elementals guided by the unerring hand of the rulers, their correlation, we might call it, with the elements of pure matter results in our terrestrial phenomena such as light, heat, magnetism, etc. Of course, we shall never agree with the American substantialists who call every force and energy, whether light, heat, electricity, or cohesion, an entity, for this would be equivalent to calling the noise produced by the rolling of the wheels of a vehicle an entity, thus confusing and identifying that noise with the driver outside of the guiding master intelligence within the vehicle. But we certainly give that name to the drivers and to those guiding intelligences, the ruling Daihan Kohans, as shown. The elementals, the natural force, are the acting through invisible, or rather impeccable secondary causes, and in themselves the effects of primary causes behind the veil of all terrestrial phenomena. Electricity, light, heat, etc., have been aptly termed the ghost or shadow of matter in motion. Supersensuous states of matter, whose effect only we are able to cognize. To expand then the simile given above, the sensation of light is like the sound of the rolling wheels, a purely phenomenal effect, having no existence outside the observer. The proximate exciting cause of the sensation is comparable to the driver, a supersensuous state of matter in motion, a nature force or elemental. But behind even this stand, just as the owner of the carriage directs the driver from within, the higher and nominal causes, the intelligences from which those essence radiate these states of mother, generating the countless milliards of elementals or psychic nature spirits, just as every drop of water generates its physical infestimal infusora, gods, monads, and atoms. It is Pohat who guide the transfer of the principles from one planet to the other, from one star to another, child star. When a planet dies, its informing principles are transferred to a Laya or sleeping center with potential but latent energy in it, which is thus awakened into life and begins to form itself into a new sidereal body. It is most remarkable that while honestly confessing their entire ignorance of the true nature of even terrestrial matter, primordial substance, being regarded more as a dream than as a sober reality, the physicists should set themselves up as judges, nevertheless, of that matter and claim to know what it is able and is not able to do in various combinations. Scientists know it matter, hardly skin deep, and yet they will dogmatize. It is a mode of motion and nothing else. But the force that is inherent in a living person's breath, when blowing a speck of dust from the table, is also undeniably a mode of motion, and it is undeniably not a quality of matter or the particles of that speck, and it emanates from the living and thinking entity that breathed, whether the impulse originated consciously or unconsciously. Indeed, to endow matter, something of which nothing is known so far, with an inherent quality called force of nature, of which still less is known, is to create a far more serious difficulty than that which lies in exception of the intervention of our natural nature spirits in every natural phenomenon. The occultists who do not say, if they would express themselves correctly, that matter, but only the substance of essence of matter, is indestructible and eternal, assert that all the so-called forces of nature, electricity, magnetism, light, heat, far from being modes of motion of material particles, are in their ultimate constitution, the differentiated aspects of the universal motion, which is discussed and explained in the first pages of this volume. When Fohat is said to produce 7 Laya centers, it means that from formative or creative purposes, the great law, thesis, may call it God, stops, or rather modifies its perpetual motion on 7 indivisible points within the area of manifested universe. We have said that Laya is what science may call the 0 point or line, the realm of absolute negativeness, or the one real absolute force, the nomenon of the 7th state, of which we ignorantly call and recognize as force, or again, the noumenon of undifferentiated cosmic substance, which is itself an unreachable and unknowable object in infinite perception, the root and basis of all states of objectivity and subjectivity too, the neutral axis, not one of many aspects, but its center. It may serve to elucidate the meaning if we attempt to imagine a neutral center, the dream of those who would discover perpetual motion. A neutral center is, in one aspect, the limiting point of any given set of senses. Thus, imagine 2 consecutive planes of matter as already formed, each of these corresponding to an appropriate set of perceptive organs. We are forced to admit that between these 2 planes of matter, an incessant circulation takes place, and if we follow the atoms and molecules of, say, the lower in their transformation upwards, These will come to a point where they pass altogether beyond the range of the faculties we are using on the lower plane. In fact, to us, the matter of the lower plane, there vanishes from our perception into nothing, or rather it passes on to the higher plane, and the state of matter corresponding to such point of transition must certainly possess special and not readily discoverable properties. Such 7 neutral centers, then produced by Foucault, who then, as Milton has said it, quote, fair foundation are laid whereon to build, end quote, quickens matter into activity and evolution. The primordial atom, anu, cannot be multiplied either in its pregenic state or its progeny. Therefore, it is called sum total, figuratively, of course, as that sum total is boundless. That which is the abyss of nothingness to the physicist, who knows only the world as visible causes and effects, is the boundless space of the divine plurum to the occultist. Among many other objections to the doctrine of an endless evolution of re-involution or reabsorption of the cosmos, a process which, according to the Brahmanical and esoteric doctrine, is without a beginning or end, the occultist is told that it cannot be, since by all admission of modern scientific philosophy, it is a necessity of nature to run down. If the tendency of nature to run down is to be considered so forcible an objection, to occult cosmogony, how, we may ask, do your positivists and free thinkers and scientists account for the planets around us of active stellar systems? They had they had eternity to run down in. Why then is not the cosmos a huge inert mass? Even the moon is only hypothetically believed to be a dead planet, run down, and astronomically does not seem to be acquainted with many such dead planets. The query is unanswerable. But apart from that, must be noted that the idea of amount of transformable energy in our little system coming to an end is based purely on fallacious conception of a white hot incandescent sun, perpetually radiating away his heat without compensation into space. To this we reply that nature runs down and disappears from the objective plane, only to reemerge after a time of rest out of the subjective and reconscend once more. Our cosmos and nature will run down only to reappear on a more perfect plane after every pralaya. The matter of the Eastern philosophers is not the matter and nature of the Western metaphysicians. For what is matter? And above all, what is our scientific philosophy? But that which was so justly and politely defined by Kant as the science of the limits to our knowledge. Where have the many attempts made by science so bind to connect and define all the phenomena of organic life by mere physical and chemical manifestations brought to it? To speculation, generally, mere soap bubbles that burst one after the other before the men of science were permitted to discover the real facts. All this would have been avoided, and the progress of knowledge would have been preceded with gigantic strides, had only science and philosophy abstained from attempting hypothesis on mere one-sided knowledge of their matter. True. If no physical intellect is capable of counting the grains of sand covering a few miles of seashore, or to fathom the ultimate nature and essence of those grains, palpable and visible on the palm of the naturalist, how can any materialist limit the laws changing the conditions and being of the atoms in primordial chaos, or know anything certain about the capabilities of potency of their atoms and nucleus before and after their formation into worlds? These changeless and eternal molecules far thicker in space than the grains on the ocean's shore, may differ in their constitution along the line of their planes of existence, as the soul substance differs from its vehicle, the body. Each atom has 7 planes of being or existence, we are taught, and each plane is governed by its specific laws in evolution and absorption, ignorant of any even approximate chronological data from which to start in attempting to decide the age of our planet to the origin of our solar system. Astronomers, geologists, and physicists are drifting with each new hypothesis farther and farther away from the shores of fact into the fathomless depths of speculative ontology. The law of analogy in the plane of structures between the trans-solar systems and the intra-solar planets does not necessarily bear upon the finite conditions to which every visible body is subject in this our plane of being. The occult science, this law, the first and most important key to cosmic physics, but it has to be studied in its minutest details and to be turned 7 times before one comes to understand it. Occult philosophy is the only science that can teach it. However, then can anyone hang the truth or the untruth of the occultist position that the cosmos is eternal in its unconditional collectivity and finite, but in its conditional manifestations on this one-sided physical emanation that it is a necessity of nature to run down? Sorry, guys. I don't know if that's gunshots or firecrackers. She heard. I don't know if you can hear them. Either way. With these verses, the 4th sloka of stanza 6 ends that portion of the stanzas which relate to the universal cosmogony after the last Mahaparila, or universal destruction, which, when it comes, sweeps out of space every differentiated thing, God as atoms, like so many dry leaves. From the verse onward, the stanzas are concerned only with our solar system in general, with the planetary chains therein, inferently with the history of our globe, the 4th and its chain especially. All the stanzas and verses which follow is the book 1, refer only to the evolution of and on our earth. With regard to the latter, a strange tenet, strange from the modern scientific standpoint only, of course, is held which ought to be made known. But before entirely new and rather startling theories are presented to the reader, they must be prefaced by a few words of explanation. This is absolutely necessary, as these theories clash not only with the modern science, but contradict on certain points early statements made by other theosophists who claim to base their explanations and renderings of these teachings on the same authority as we do. This may give rise to the idea that there is a decided contradiction between the expounders and the same doctrine, whereas the difference in reality arises from the incompetence and incompleteness of information given to earlier writers, who thus drew some erroneous conclusions and indulged in premature speculation in their endeavor to present a complete system to the public. Thus, the reader who is already a student of theosophy must be surprised to find in these pages the rectification of certain statements made in various theosophical works, and also the explanation of certain points which have remained obscured, because these were necessarily left incomplete. Many are the questions upon which even the author of esoteric Buddhism has not touched. On the other hand, even has introduced several mistaken notions which must now be presented in their true mystic light, as far as the present writer is capable of doing so. Let us then make a short break between the slokas just explained and those which, for the cosmic periods which separate them are immense duration. This will afford an ample time to take a bird's eye view of the point pertaining to the secret doctrine, which has been presented to the public under a more or less uncertain and sometimes mistaken light. A few early theosophical misconceptions concerning planets, rounds, and man. Among the 11 stanzas omitted, there is one which gives a full description of the formation of the planetary chains, one after another, after the first cosmic and atomic differentiation had commenced in the primitive acosism. It is an idle to speak of laws arising when deity prepares to create, for laws are rather law, is eternal and uncreated, and that deity is law, and vice versa. Moreover, the one eternal law unfolds everything into manifested nature on a sevenfold principle, among the rest, the countless circular chains of worlds, composed of 7 globes, graduated on the 4 lower planes of the world of formation, the 3 others belonging to the archetypal universe. Out of these 7, only one, the lowest of the most material of these globes, is within our plane or means of perception. The 6 others lying outside of it, and being therefore invisible to the terrestrial eye. Every such chain of worlds is the progeny and creation of another, lower and dead chain, its reincarnation, so to say. To make it clearer, we are told of the planets, of which 7 only were held as sacred, as being ruled by the highest regents or gods, and not at all because the ancients knew nothing of the others. That each of these, whether known or unknown, is septenary, as is the chain of which the earth belongs. For instance, all such planets as Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, etc., or our Earth are visible to us as a globe, probably is in the inhabitants of other planets, and any, if any, because they are all on the same plane, while the superior few globes of these planets are on other planes, quite outside of that of our terrestrial senses, as their relative position is given further on. Also, the diagram appended to the comments. A few words of explanation is all that is needed at present. The invisible companions correspond curiously to that which we call the principles in man. The 7 are the 3 material planes and the spiritual plane, answering to the 3 yudhas, material bases, and 1 spiritual vehicle, Vahan, of our 7 principles in the human division. If, for the sake of a clearer mental conception, we imagine the human principles to be arranged in the following scheme, we shall obtain the annex diagram of correspondence. Sorry, guys, it's not full. Hopefully you see that. This is what we're talking about. I wanted to be able to show that for reference. Some of the other books I can't because the diagrams are not easily seen. The dark horizontal lines of the lower planes are the Eupides is one case, and the planes in the case of the planetary chain. Of course, as regards the human principles, the diagram does not place them quite in order, yet it shows a correspondence and analogy to which attention is now drawn. As the reader will see, it is a case of descent into matter, the adjustment in both the mystic and the physical senses of the two and their interblending for the great coming struggle of life that awaits both the entities. Entity may be thought a strange term to use in the case of a globe, but the ancient philosophers then, our modern geologists, are in theirs, and Pliny, who called the earth our kind nurse and mother, the only element which is not immutable to men, spoke more truly than Watts, who fancied that he saw in her the footstool of God, for earth is only the footstool of man in his ascension to higher regions, the vestibule to glorious mansions, through which a moving crowd for every press. But this only shows how admirably the occult philosophy fits everything in nature, and how much more logical are its tenets than the lifeless hypothetical speculations of physical science. Having learned thus much, the mystic will be better prepared to understand the occult teaching, though every formal student of known modern science may and probably will regard it as preposterous nonsense. The student of occultism, however, holds that the theory at present under discussion is far more philosophical and probable than any other. It is more logical, at any rate, that the theory recently advanced, which made of the moon the projection of a portion of our earth extruded when the latter was not but a globe in fusion or a molten plastic mass. It is said that the planetary chains have their days and their nights, periods of activity or life, and inertia or death, and behave in heaven as do men on earth. They generate their likes, get old, and become personally extinct. Their spiritual principles only live in the progeny as survival of themselves. Without attempting the very difficult task of giving out the whole process in all its cosmic details, enough may be said to give an approximate idea of it. When a planetary chain is in its last round, its globe 1 or A, before finally dying and sends out all its energy and principles into a neutral center of latent force, a Laya center, and thereby informs a new nucleus of undifferentiated substance or matter, calls it into activity or gives it life. Suppose such a process to have taken place in the lunar planetary chain. Suppose again, for argument's sake, though Mr. Darwin's theory quoted below has lately been upset, even if the fact has not been ascertained by mathematical calculation, that the moon is far older than the earth. Imagine the 6 fellow globes of the moon, aeons before the first globe of R7 was evolved, just in the same position in relation to each other as the few globes of our chain occupy in regard to our earth now. The constitution of man and the planetary chain, and now it will be easy to imagine further globe A of the lunar chain informing globe A of the terrestrial chain, and dying globe B of the former, sending after that its energy to globe B of the new chain, then globe C of the lunar, creating its progeny sphere C of the terrene chain, then the moon, our satellite, pouring forth into the lowest globe of our planetary ring, globe D, our Earth, all its life, energy, powers, and having transferred them to a new center, becoming virtually a dead planet, in which rotation has almost ceased since the birth of our globe. The moon is now the cold residue and residual quantity, the shadow dragged after the new body into which her living powers and principles have transfused. She now is doomed for long ages to ever pursuing the earth, to be attracted by and attracted her progeny, constantly vampirized by her children. She revenges herself on it by soaking it through and through the nefarious, invisible, and poison influence which emanates from the occult outside of her nature. For she is a dead yet a living body. The particles of her decaying corpse are full of active and destructive life, although the body which they have formed is soulless and lifeless. Therefore, its emanations are at the same time beneficent and maleficent. This circumstance, finding its parallel on Earth, is the same fact that the grass and planets are nowhere near juicy and thriving than on the graves, while at the same time it is a graveyard or corpse emanation which kill. And like all ghosts or vampires, the moon is a friend of the sorcerers and the foe of the unwary. From the archaic aeons and the later times of witches of Thiesley down to some of the present Tantrikas of Bengal, her nature and properties were known to every occultist, but have remained a close book for physicists. Such is the moon for the astronomical, geological, and physical standpoints. As to her metaphysical and psychic nature, it must remain standpoints. And of an occult secret in this work, as it was in the volume of Esoteric Buddhism, notwithstanding the rather sanguine statement made therein on that there is not much mystery left now in the riddle of the eighth sphere. These are topics indeed on which the adepts are very reserved in their communications to uninitiated pupils. And since they have moreover never sanctioned or permitted any published speculations upon them, the less said, the better. Yet without treading upon the forbidden ground of the eighth sphere, it may be useful to state some additional facts that regard to ex-monads of the lunar chain, the lunar ancestors, as they play a leading part in the coming anthropogenesis. This brings us directly to the septenary constitution of man, and as some discussion has arisen of late about their classification to be adopted for division of the microcosm entity, two systems are now appended with a view of facilitate comparison. The subjoined short article is from a pen of Mr. T. Suda Rao, a learned Vedantin scholar. He prefers the Brahmanical division of the Raja Yoga, and from metaphysical point of view, he is quite right. But as it is a question of simple choice and expediency, we hold in this work to the time-honored classification of the Trans-Himalayan Arhat esoteric school, and the following table and explanatory texts are reprinted from the Theosophisis, sorry guys, I say certain words, my teeth want to fly out, of mantras, and they are also contained in the 5 years of Theosophy, septenary division of different Indian systems. We get below a tabular form the classification adopted by the Buddhists and Vedic teachers and principles of man. And give me a second, guys. So this is the table that they're referring to. From the foregoing table, it will be seen that the third principle in the Buddhist classification is not separately mentioned in the Vedic division as it merely the vehicle of prana. It will also be seen that the fourth principle is included in the third kosa, as the same principle is but the vehicle of willpower, which is but an energy of the mind. It must also be noticed that the, oh boy, I'm going to try my best not to slaughter this, Vignanamaya Maya Kosa, sorry guys, is considered to be distinct from the Manomaya Kosa, as division is made after death between the lower part of the mind, as it were, which has a closer affinity with the fourth principle than with the sixth, and its higher part, which attracts itself to the latter, and which is, in fact, the basis for the higher spiritual individuality of man. We may also here point out to our readers that the classification mentioned in the last column is for all practical purposes connected with Raja Yoga, the best and simplest. Though there are 7 principles in man, there are but 3 distinct up his basis, in each of which his Atma may work independently of the rest. These 3 upadhis, guys, I'm sorry, can be separated by an adept without killing himself. He cannot separate the 7 principles from each other without destroying his constitution. The student will now be better prepared to see that between the 3 uphis of the Raja Yoga and the Atma, and our 3 Udhis, Atma, and additional 3 divisions, there is in reality but very little difference. Moreover, every adept in his Himalayan or trans-Himalayan Indian or Patanjali, the Arasanja, or Mahavihana schools have become a Raya Yogi. He must therefore accept the Taraka Raya classification in principle and theory, whatever classification he resorts to for practical and occult purposes. Thus, it matters very little whether one speaks of the 3 upadas with their 3 aspects of Atma, the eternal immortal synthesis, or calls them the 7 principles. For the benefit of those who may not have read, or if they have, may not have clearly understood in Theosophical writings, the doctrine of septenary chains of worlds in the solar cosmos, the teaching is briefly thus: everything in the metaphysical, as in the physical universe, is septenary. Hence, every sidal body, every planet, whether visible or invisible, is credited with 6 companion globes. The evolution of life proceeds on these 7 globes or bodies from the first to the 7th in 7 rounds or 7 cycles. These globes are formed by a process which the occultists call the rebirth of planetary chains or rings. When the 7th and last round of one of such rings have been entered upon, the highest or first globe, A, followed by all the others down to the last, instead of entering upon a certain time of rest or obscuration, as in their previous rounds, begins to die out. The planetary dissolution, Pralaya, is at hand and its hour has struck. Each globe has to transfer its life and energy to another planet, the moon and the earth. Our earth as visible representative of invisible superior few globes. Its lords or principles has to live as have the others through 7 rounds. During the first 3, it forms and consolidates. During the 4th, it settles and hardens. During the last 3, it gradually returns to the first ethereal form. It is spiritualized, so to say. Its humanity develops fully only in the 4th, our present round. Up to the 4th life cycle, it is referred to as humanity, only for a lack of more appropriate term. Like the grub which becomes a chrysalis and butterfly, man, or rather that which becomes man, passes through all the forms and kingdoms during the first round, and through all the human shapes during the first 2 following rounds. Arrive on our earth at the commencement of the 4th in the present series of life cycles and races. Man is the first form that appears thereon, being preceded only by the mineral and vegetable kingdoms, even the latter having to develop and continue its further evolution through man. This will be explained in Book 2. During the 3 rounds to come, humanity, like the globe on which it lives, will be ever trending to resume its primordial form, that of the Dihang host, man tends to become a god, and then God, like every other atom in the universe. Beginning so early as with the second round, evolution proceeds already on quite different plane. It is only during the first round that heavenly man becomes a human being on globe A. Re becomes a mineral, a plant, an animal on globe B and C. The process changes entirely from the second round, but you have learned prudence, and I advise you to say nothing before the time for saying it has come. Every life cycle on globe D, our Earth, is composed of 7 root races. They commence with the ethereal and end with the spiritual on the double line of physical and moral evolution from the beginning of the terrestrial round to its close. The other, the globe round, or the terrestrial. This is very described in esoteric Buddhism and needs no further elucidation for the time being. The first root race, the first man on earth, irrespective of form, were the progeny of this celestial man, called rightly in Indian philosophy the lunar ancestors, or the Pitris, of which there are 7 classes or hierarchies, as all those will be sufficiently explained in the following sections of Book 2. No more needed to be said here. But the 2 works already mentioned, both of which treat of subjects from the occult doctrine and need particular notice, esoteric Buddhism is too well known in theosophical circles and even to the outside world for it to be necessary to enter the length upon its merits here. It is an excellent book and has done still more excellent work, but this does not alter the fact that it contains some mistakes, notions, and that it has led many theosophists and lay readers to form an erroneous conception of the secret Eastern doctrines, moreover seem perhaps a little too materialistic. Man, which came later, was an attempt to present the archaic doctrine from more ideal standpoint and translate some versions in and from the astral light to render some teachings partly gathered from a master's thoughts, but unfortunately misunderstood. This work also speaks of the evolution of early races of men on Earth and contains some excellent pages of philosophical character, but so far it is only an interesting little mystical romance. It has failed in its mission because the conditions required for a correct translation of these versions and visions were not present. Hence, the reader must not wonder in if our volumes contradict the earlier descriptions in 7 particulars. Esoteric cosmogony in general and evolution of human monads especially differ so essentially in these 2 books and other theosophical works written independently by beginners that it becomes impossible to proceed with the present work without special mention of these 2 earlier volumes, for both have a number of admirers, esoteric Buddhism especially. The time has arrived for the explanation of matter in this direction. Mistakes have now been checked by the original teachings and corrected. If one of the said works have too pronounced a bias towards materialistic science, the other is decidedly too idealistic and is at times fantastic. From the doctrine, rather incomprehensible to Western minds, which deals with the periodical obscurations and successive rounds of the globes around their circular chain, were born the first perplexities and misconceptions. One of such has reference to the 5th and even 6th rounders. Those who knew that a round was preceded and followed by a long pralia, a pause of rest, which create an impassable gulf between 2 rounds until this time came for a renewed cycle of life, could not understand the fallacy of taking and talking about 5th and 6th rounders in our 4th round. Gautama Buddha was held was a six-rounder. Plato had some other great philosophers in mind. Fifth-rounders, how could it be? One master taught and affirmed that there was such fifth-rounders. Even now on earth, and through our understand to say that mankind was yet in the fourth round. In another place, he seemed to say that we were in the fifth round. To this, an apocalyptic answer was returned by another teacher. A few drops of rain do not make a monsoon, though they presage it. No, we are not in the fifth round, but fifth round men have been coming in from the last few thousand years. This was worse than the riddle of the Sphinx. Students of occultism subjected their brain to the wildest work of speculation. For a considerable time, they tried to outive Oedipus and reconcile the two statements. And as the masters kept as silent as the stony Sphinx herself, they were accused of inconsistency, contradiction, and discrepancies. But they were simply allowing the speculations to go on in order to teach a lesson which the Western mind sorely needs. In their conceit and arrogance, as in their habit of materializing every metaphysical conception and term without allowing any margin for Eastern metaphor and allegory, the Orientalists have made a jumble of the Hindu exoteric philosophy, and the Theosophists were now doing the same with regard to esoteric teachings. To this day, it is evident that the latter had utterly failed to understand the meaning of the term fifth and sixth rounds. But it is simply this: every round brings about a new development and even an entire change in the mental, psychic, spiritual, and physical constitution of man. All these principles evoluting on ever ascending scale. Thence it follows that these persons who, like Confucius and Plato, belong psychically, mentally, and spiritually to the higher planes of evolution, where in our fourth round, as average men will be in the fifth round, whose mankind is destined to find itself on the scale of evolution immensely higher than is our present humanity. Similarly, Vata Buddha, wisdom incarnate, was still higher and greater than all the men we mentioned, who are called fifth rounders, while Buddha and Sankarayana are termed six rounders allegorically. Thence again, they concealed the wisdom of the remark pronounced to the time evasive, that a few drops of rain do not make a monsoon, though they presage it. And now the truth of the remark made in esoteric Buddhism by the author will be fully apparent. It is possible, when the complicated facts of an entirely unfamiliar science are being presented to the untrained mind for the first time, to put them forward with all their appropriate qualifications and abnormal developments. We must be content to take a broad rules first and deal with the exceptions afterwards, and especially in this case with study, in connection with which the traditional methods of teaching generally follow and aim an impression every fresh idea on the memory of provoking and perplexity it at last relives. Sorry guys, it's in italics and I can't really read it clearly. As the author of, oh geez Louise, hang on. As the author of the remark was himself, as he says, an untrained mind in occultism, his own inferences and his better knowledge of modern astronomical speculations and of archaic doctrines led him quite naturally and unconsciously to himself to commit a few mistakes of detail rather than any broad rule. One such will now be noticed. It is a trifling one, still it is calculated to be led many a beginner in erroneous conceptions. But as the mistakes notions of the earlier editions were corrected in the annotations of the fifth edition, so the 6 may be revised and perfected. There were several reasons for such mistakes. They were due to the necessity under which the teachers labored of giving what was considered an evasive answers, the questions being too persistently pressed to be left unnoticed, while on the other hand, they could only partially answered. These position notwithstanding the confession that half a loaf is better than no bread, was but too often misunderstood and hardly appreciated as it ought to be. As resulted thereof, gratuitous speculations were sometimes indulged in by the European lay chelas. Among such were the mystery of the eighth sphere in its relation to the moon, and the erroneous statement that 2 of the superior globes of the terrestrial chain were 2 of our well-known planets. Besides the Earth, there are only 2 other worlds of our chain which are visible, Mars and Mercury. This was a great mistake, but the blame for it is to be attached as much as vagueness and incompleteness of the master's answer as to the question of the learned itself, which was equally vague and indefinite. It was asked what planets of those known to ordinary science besides Mercury belong to our system of worlds. Now, if by system of worlds our terrestrial chain is string, was intended in the mind of the querist instead of the solar system of worlds as it should have been, then of course the answers was likely to be misunderstood, for the reply was Mars, etc., and 4 other planets of which astronomy knows nothing. Neither A, B, nor Y, Z are known, nor can they be seen through physical means, however perfected. This is plain astronomy, as yet known nothing in reality of the planets, neither the ancient ones nor those discovered in modern times. No companion planets from A to Z, no upper globes of any chain in the solar system can be seen. As Mars, Mercury, and the 4 other planets they bear in relation to Earth, which no master or high occultist will ever speak, much less explain the nature. Let it now be distinctly stated that then the theory broached is impossible, with or without the additional evidence furnished by modern astronomy. Physical science can supply collaborative through still very uncertain evidence, but only as regards heavenly bodies on the same plane of materiality as our objective universe. Mars and Mercury, Venus and Jupiter, like every hereto discovered planet, or those still to be discovered, are all per se the representatives of our plane of such chains, as distinctly stated in one of the numerous letters of Mr. Sennett's teacher. There are other innumerable monveritic chains of globes which bear intelligent beings both in and outside of our solar system. But neither Mars nor Mercury belong to our chain. They are along with the other planets, septary units in the great host of chains of our systems, and are as visible as the upper globes are invisible. If it's still argued the certain expressions in the teacher's letters were liable to mislead, the answer comes, amen, to so it was. The author of Esoteric Buddhism understood it well when he wrote that such are the traditional modes of teaching. By provoking the perplexity, they do or do not relieve, as the case may be. At all events, if it urged that this might be explained earlier, and the true nature of the planets given out as they now are, the answer comes that it was not found expedient to do so at the time, as it would have opened the way to a series of additional questions which could never be answered on account of their esoteric nature, and thus would only become embarrassing. It had been declared from the first and has been repeatedly asserted since that no theosophist, not even as an accepted Sheila, let alone lay students, could expect to have the secret teaching explained to him thoroughly and completely before he had sorry guys, irrevocably, that's not coming out today, pledged himself to the brotherhood and passed through at least one initiation because no figure and numbers could be given to the public, for figures and numbers are the key to the esoteric system. That what was revealed was merely the esoteric lining of which is contained in almost all the esoteric scriptures of world religions, preeminently in the Brahmas and Upanishads and the Vedas, and even in the Puranas. It was a small portion of what is divulged far more fully now in present volumes, and even this very incomplete and fragmentary. When the present work was commenced, the writer, feeling sure that the speculation about Mars and Mercury was a mistake, applied to the teachers by the letter for explanation. An authoritative version both came in due time, and verbatim exacts from these are now given. It is quite correct that Mars is in a state of obscuration at present, and Mercury just beginning to get out of it. You might add that Venus is in her last round. If neither Mercury nor Venus had satellites, it is because of the reasons Phobos, the supposed inner satellite, is no satellite at all. As remarked long ago by Laplace and now by Fay, Phobos keeps a too short periodic time, and therefore there must exist some defect in the mother idea of theory. As Fay justly observes, again, both Mars and Mercury are septenary chains of independent Earths. Sidereal lords and superiors, as you are independent of the principles of Dalmling, which were perhaps his 6 brothers, with or without nightcaps, gratification of curiosity is the end of knowledge for some men, was said by Bacon, who was at right in postulating this truism, as those who were familiar with it before him were right to hedge of wisdom from knowledge and tracing limits, that which is to be given out at once. Remember, knowledge dwells in heads replete with thoughts of other men, wisdom in minds attentive to their own. You can never impress too profoundly on the minds of those whom impart some of the esoteric teachings. My eyes go crazy when. Again, here are more extracts from another letter written by the same authority. This time is an answer to some objections laid before the teachers. They are based upon extremely scientific as futile reasonings about the advisability of trying to reconcile the esoteric theories with the speculation of modern science, and were written by a young theosophist as a warning against the secret doctrine, and in reference to the same subject. Here he declared that if there were such companion Earths, they must be only a wee bit less material than our globe. How then was it that they could not be seen? The answer was, were psychic and spiritual teachings more fully understood, it would become next to impossible to even imagine such incongruity, unless less trouble is taken to reconcile the irreconcilable, that is to say, that the metaphysical and spiritual sciences with physical and natural philosophy, natural being a synonym to them, men of science, of the matter which falls under the perception of their corporal senses, no progress can really be achieved. Our globe, as taught from the first, is at the bottom of the arc of descent, where the matter of our perceptions exhibits itself in the grossest form. Hence it is only stands to reason that the globes which overshadow the earth must be on different and superior planes, In short, as globes, they are in co-indunation, but not in consubstantiality with our earth, and thus pertain to quite another state of consciousness. Our planet, like all those we see, is adapted to the particular state of its human stock, that state which enables us to see with our naked eye the sidereal bodies with our coexistential, with our terrene plane and substance, just as their respective inhabitants, the Jovians, Martians, and others, can perceive our little world, because our planes of consciousness, differing as they do in degree, but being the same in kind, are on the same layer of differentiated matter. What I wrote was the minor paralia concerns only our little string of globes. We called chain strings in those days of lip confusion. To such string our earth belongs. This ought to have shown plainly that our other planets were also strings or chains. If he, meaning the objector, would perceive even the dim silhouette of one of such planets on the higher planes, he has to first throw off even the thin clouds of the astral matter that stands between him and the next plane. It becomes patent why we could not perceive, even with the help of the best earthly telescopes, that which is outside our world of matter. Those alone, who we call adepts, who know how to direct their mental vision and to transfer their consciousness, physical and psychic, both to other planes of being, are able to speak with authority on such subjects, and they tell us plainly. Quote, lead the life necessary for the acquisition of such knowledge and powers, and wisdom will come to you naturally. Whenever you are able to attune your consciousness to any of the 7 chords of universal consciousness, those chords that run along the sounding board of cosmos, vibrating from one eternity to another, when you have studied thoroughly the music of the spheres, then only will you become quite free to share your knowledge with those with whom it is safe to do so. Meanwhile, be prudent. Do not give out the great truths that are the inheritance of the future races to our present generation. Do not attempt to unveil the secret of being and not being to those unable to see the hidden meaning of Apollo's heptachord, the lyre of the radiant God, in each of the 7 strings of which dwelleth the spirit, soul, and astral body of the cosmos, whose shell only now is fallen into the hands of modern science. Be prudent, we say, prudent and wise, and above all, take care what those who learn from you believe in, lest by deceiving themselves they deceive others. For such is the fate of every truth which men are as yet unfamiliar. Let rather the planetary chains and other super and sub-cosmic mysteries remain a dreamland for those who can neither see nor yet believe the other can. That's profound. It is to be regretted that a few of us have followed the wise advice, and that many a priceless pearl, many a jewel of wisdom, has been cast to the enemy, unable to understand its value, and who has turned around and rent us. Let us imagine, wrote the same master to his 2 lady chelas, as he called the author Esoteric Buddhism and other gentlemen, his co-student for some time. Let us imagine that our Earth is one of a group of 7 planets or men-bearing worlds. In 7 planets are the sacred planets of antiquity, and all are sepentary. Now the life impulse reaches A, or rather that which is destined to become A, and which is also but cosmic dust, Alaya Center. In these early letters, in which the terms had been invented and words coined, the rings, very often became rounds, and the rounds life cycles and vice versa. To a correspondent who called a round a world ring, the teacher wrote, I believe this will lead to further confusion. Around, we are agreed to call the passage of a monad from globe A to globe G to Z. The world ring is correct. Advice, Mr. Strongly to agree upon a nomenclature before going any further. Notwithstanding this agreement, many mistakes owing to this confusion crept into the earliest teachings. The races even were occasionally mixed up with the rounds and rings and led to similar mistakes in man. From the first, the master had written, not being permitted to give you the whole truth or divulge the number of isolated fractions, I am unable to satisfy you. This is in answer to the question, if we are right, then the total existence prior to man period is 637, etc., etc. To the queries relating to figures, the reply was to solve the problem of 777 incarnations. Though I am obliged to withhold information, yet if you should work out the problem by yourself, it will be my duty to tell you so. But they never were so worked out, and the results were never ceasing perplexity and mistakes. Even the teaching about sedentary constitution of the sidereal bodies and of the macrocosm, from which the sedentary divisions of the microcosm or man has until now been among the most esoteric. In olden times, it used to be divulged only in the initiation and along with the most sacred figures of the cycles. Now, as it's stated in one of the Theosophical journals, the revelation of the whole system of cosmogony had not been contemplated, nor even thought for one moment possible, at a time when a few bits of information were sparingly given out in answer to letters written by the author of Esoteric Buddhism, in which he put forward a multiplicity of questions. Among these were questions on such problems as no master, however high and independent he might be, would have the right to answer, these divulging to the world the most time-honored and archaic of the mysteries of ancient college temples. Hence, only a few of the doctrines were revealed in their broad outlines, while details were constantly withheld, and all the efforts made to elicit more information about them were systematically eluded from the beginning. This is perfectly natural. Of the 4 Vedas, out of the 7 branches of knowledge mentioned in the Puranas, namely Vajuna, Vaida, sorry if I'm saying that wrong, Mahavidya, the great magic, knowledge, now degenerated into Tantrika worship, Guha Vidya, the science of mantras and their true rhythm or chanting of mystical incantations. It is only the last one, Atma Vidya, or the true spiritual and divine wisdom, which can throw absolute and final light upon the teachings of the 3 first named. Without the help of Atma Vidya, the other 3 remain no better than surface science, geometrical magnitudes, having length and breadth, but no thickness. They are like the soul, limbs, and mind of a sleeping man, capable of mechanical motions, of chaotic dreams, and even sleepwalking, of producing visible effects, but simulated by instinctual, not intellectual causes, lest of all be fully conscious spiritual impulses. A good deal can be given out and explained from the 3 first named sciences, but unless the key to their teachings is furnished at Atma Vidya, they will remain forever like the fragments of a mingled textbook, like the aggregations of great truths, dimly perceived by the most spiritual, but distorted out of all proportion by those who nail every shadow to the wall. Then again, another great perplexity was created in the minds of students by the incomplete exposition of the doctrine of evolution of the monads. To be fully realized, both this process and that of the birth of the globes must be examined far more from the metaphysical aspect than from what one might call a statistical standpoint involving figures and numbers, which are rarely permitted to be broadly used. Unfortunately, there are few who are inclined to handle these doctrines only metaphysically. Even the best of the Western writers upon the doctrine declares in his work that on pure metaphysics of the sort, we are not now engaged when speaking of the evolution of the monads. And in such case, as the teacher remarks in the letter to him, why this preaching of our doctrines, all this uphill work swimming in adversum flurum? Why should the West learn from the East? That which can never meet the requirements of special tastes of the aesthetics. And he draws his correspondent's attention to the formidable difficulties encountered by us, the adepts, in every attempt to explain metaphysics in the Western mind. And well he may, for the outside of metaphysics, no occult philosophy, no esotericism is possible. It is like trying to explain the aspirations and affections, the love and hatred, the most private and sacred workings in the soul and mind of the living by anatomical description of the chest and brain of his dead body. Let us now examine two tenets mentioned above and hardly alluded to in esoteric Buddhism and supplement them as far as lies in power. I'm going to leave it there. Wow, that was long. Sorry about that. If you're lost a little bit, go look up the Kali Yuga cycles of the planes that they're talking about. That will really help visualize and conceptualize their version of what they're talking about with that. So I just light bulb, because I'm sure a couple of people might be lost on that unless you know about these studies. And I do apologize for the mispronunciations of words, as always. Sending each and every one of you love and light. If you have it within you to help me, please do. And it's all very appreciated. I thank you for those who have already donated and are helping me out, feed myself and my cats, and keeping me alive. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you on the next one, guys. Bye.